One person native to the region of Lake Okeechobee made such an impression on the native Seminoles and white settlers, his name is still known today. This is the fascinating story of Billy Bowlegs III, with a reputation of compassion and impeccable honesty. This influence spanned many decades. Billy Bowlegs helped his fellow Seminoles throughout South Florida, serving as a link between the native Indians and the white settlers. He was born February 17, 1862. His father, Billy Falwell, of the Black Snake Seminole clan, and his mother, Nancy, who was half African American from originally runaway slaves and half Seminole. His father was also known as Key West Billy, having lived in the Florida Keys for years. He was also getting along very well with the white settlers in the Keys. Their young son, born in 1862, just north of Lake Okeechobee, was named Billy Farewell. He grew tall and strong. Young Billy's parents did not remain together as a couple, and his mother, Nancy, married later to Charles Peacock of the Deer Clan. A half-sister named Lucy was born in 1868, and a half-brother, Lewis Tucker, born in 1878. By age 11, Billy was a skilled hunter and quite tall, 6 feet 2 inches. He did want a different name, so he selected Billy Bowlegs III. He knew of the great chief Billy Bowlegs from the Seminole Wars in the 1850s. He admired him and knew him to be a great hunter also. The very name Bowlegs meant alligator chief. Being half Seminole, his mother related to Chief Osceola, Billy has always thought of himself as a native Seminole and learned its history. Young Billy became a great hunter in the Florida wilderness. By the 1880s, he had a great reputation for a hunting guide. Some of his white clients were like U.S. President Chester A. Arthur in 1884 while visiting Florida. Arthur was the current president of the United States at that time. Also, the railroad giant Henry Flagler hunted with Billy Bowlegs. He also led Henry Plant, the Florida West Coast Railroad man, on hunting trips looking for panthers, deer, bear, and turkey. In his early 20s, Billy had lost his mother, Nancy, in February of 1889 of the Snake Clan. She was killed by Jim Jumper, who was also the Snake Clan, over a dispute of African blacks marrying Seminoles, especially female blacks marrying full-blooded Seminole males. Nancy was murdered while trying to protect another Seminole woman being attacked. A total of about 7 were killed, including Jim Jumper, in this massacre. It occurred in an Indian camp between Okeechobee and Fort Pierce. In the 1880s, Billy met Minnie Moore Wilson and her husband James M. Wilson of Kissimmee, and together they organized Friends of the Florida Seminoles, and they all became very good long-time friends. Minnie and James worked to establish a state reservation for the Seminoles, or at least see that land was bought and put aside for them to live on. As Billy and the Wilsons worked together, Billy's English improved. His skills in reading, speaking, and writing English also improved due to his work as a hunting guide with the white sportsmen. Most of the Seminole men were very good hunters, a necessary skill in which to feed their family. Billy Bowlegs also made money by selling the meats and animal hides to steamboat captains traveling the Indian River waterway. Billy was known all the way down South Florida, even into Miami. Known to the other Seminole villages and white settlers everywhere. Yet Billy did have his favorite places to visit. Fort Pierce of the late 1890s was a good place. He knew all the merchants. One had gotten in their store recently a music box, which Billy was thrilled with. It had 5 discs of musical tunes. Every time he was in that store, he played that music box over and over again. Before long, it didn't work from overuse. The merchant took it to a jeweler in town, but he couldn't fix it. On a trip back to the merchant, Billy also brought his friend Tom Tiger. They negotiated a trade. Billy would get the non-working music box, and the merchant got $15 worth of animal skins. In just 3 days, Billy and his friend returned to the merchant and showed that the music box was now working. Billy traveled the steamboats along the East Coast. He always asked if anyone played a musical instrument. Many of the boat captains would play a banjo, which Billy loved to hear. In the 1890s, Billy was known and welcomed in all the small towns in Florida. In the early 1890s, Billy married a Seminole lady named Pilhu of the Deer Clan. Together, the couple had a son, born about 1893, whom they named Eli Morgan. His wife, Pilhu, was born 1846, more than 18 years older than Billy was, which was very common in the Seminole culture. He, with his son, lived with his sister Lucy and brother Louis near Lake Okeechobee. Billy was also part of the Celestial Railroad that ran between Jupiter, the town of Venus, Mars, and Juno. He observed the engine assembled for the train to head south in the 1889 period. He was one of their very first passengers. He went to different locations in Central and South Florida. Other Seminoles joined him, including Tommy Doctor. With his ability to read, speak, and write English, Billy was able to place catalog orders for many of the tribal members. Everyone used the Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward catalogs. The illustrations were very helpful. View of a typical Seminole village near Lake Okeechobee. Travel for many of the villagers was by walking or using narrow boats where they traveled along the creeks and rivers. Billy worked with the local town merchants. In Stewart with George Parks, trading bird plumes, deer skins, and basket work. In Fort Pierce, there was the P.P. Cobb General Store. Billy was definitely the ambassador to the Indians. A special invitation came in 1900 from the FEC railroad system run by Henry Flagler. They were sponsoring Billy to travel to Jacksonville to be part of the city's gala week, including a big parade. This was a big city in 1900. There were all types of people and things for Billy to see. He was in the Gala Week parade going through the streets of Jacksonville. He was driven in a horseless carriage, then known as an early auto, and this big parade had 500 floats. Riding in a new vehicle that most people anywhere in America had not even been in yet. His parade experience was written up in many national newspapers. Returning back to South Florida, Billy wanted to honor his friend Joe Jefferson, a New York theater actor. There would be native Seminole dancing and a big celebration for the new day of 1901. Billy referred to his friend as Heap Big White Medicine Man. Joe was even adopted by the tribe. During 1901, saw many other trips for Billy, especially down to Miami, and many additional hunting trips. He was continuously being photographed. In June 1902, Billy sent to his friend James Wilson in Kissimmee a crate of 2 young herring birds, each about 3 feet tall. A note enclosed from Billy stated, J.M. Wilson, Jr. of Kissimmee, Dear Wilson, little white herrings. I sent 2. Indian all well. Your friend, Mr. Billy Bowlegs. The Christmas of 1905, Billy spent with his dear friends James and Minnie Wilson of Kissimmee. There were several Christmas parties he attended. He received gifts. He attended the local Baptist church on Sunday and even was taken to see a moving picture show at the local opera house. Billy even stayed at the Wilsons' home the whole time. A picture of Billy with his sister and his nieces that was done in 1905. Even a photo of Billy inside a house, considered a very rare thing in early photography. 2 of his favorite places to visit away from the native villages by Lake O was to go to Fort Pierce and to go to Stewart. Billy wore his full Seminole outfit each time. He had a very colorful shirt with a traditional high, colorful turban on his head. Yet he also wore white men's black trousers, street shoes, and carried a gold watch and chain. Not just Billy, but many of the Seminoles came from the lake area to the 2 towns. In Fort Pierce, there was a famed photographer, Harry Hill, who really enjoyed taking Billy's photos. Billy loved to visit his friend Herman Carl Bentel, the Stewart baker in the 1910s in Stewart. Billy would sit on the outside bench of the bakery shop near First Street and Dixie Highway, sit there in the evenings, and talk to those who gathered to hear the stories about Alapata Flats and especially about the gator hunting. During this time was when a big dredge was creating a canal to go from Lake Okeechobee to the St. Lucie River. The dredging was draining the large, rich black lands, which very much concerned Billy. In April 1911, Billy was made an honorary member of the Kissimmee Board of Trade. He and his sister Lucy stayed for a week in 1911 with Minnie and James Wilson in Kissimmee. During that time, Lucy became very ill. Billy cared for his sister the whole time, and she did regain her health. A hospitality gift to Minnie was a pair of live white herrings, egrets they're known as. She was so happy and very glad that it was not fashionable any longer to wear plumes in ladies' hats. Besides individual photos of Billy over the years, he enjoyed having photos of he and his family members taken. Many poses of Billy exist today. In late 1910, Billy's friends Millie and James were in Jupiter, and Billy made sure to visit them there, bringing along with him his own family members. Another Stewart friend in the 1910s was the Reverend Henry M. Jarho, a Creek Indian from Oklahoma who had a winter home in Stewart and helped the local Seminoles with education and religious training. Harjo was a wealthy man after oil was discovered on his Indian land. The Wilsons always had questions about Seminole traditions to ask Billy, the Indians' official historian. The Wilsons spoke whenever they could because they were putting together a book on the Seminoles. In 1913, the Wilsons' book was published, titled The Seminoles of Florida. Billy was featured a great deal in this book. He still loved to return to the land, working a cornfield west of Lake Okeechobee. Many fine portraits of Billy and his sister Lucy were done, especially in the 1910s. Photos done in Stuart by Albert Stake, also a guardian of the Indians, had photos made by Charles, known as Fred, Hancock, outside his studio in Stuart. In August 1913, Billy was practicing some stunts on a horse when he was thrown and sustained a crushed shoulder. Dr. Edward E. Rollins from Fort Pierce was contacted to come to the village to treat Billy, who then healed very nicely after the procedure. Another additional group of Seminoles from Indiantown photographed in Stuart. Between 1913 and 1915, the Florida legislature decided to break up the large land area that made Dade County and create a separate county. The area would be the northern and most western section of Dade County. The western section was to be called Everglades County. Suggestions were already made that Billy Bowlegs, in fact, represent the new county in the Florida state legislature. However, it was the state representative, Mr. I.L. Ferris from Jacksonville and the Speaker of the House, who pushed through a name switch. He wanted the new county, especially that northern section breaking off, to be named Broward, after Napoleon Broward, the former governor of Florida, who served from 1905 to 1909 and was a friend of this representative. Broward County then indeed was created April 15, 1915. The western portion, part of Lee County, was renamed Collier County on May 8, 1923, with Everglades City being the county seat. It was named for Baron Collier, a local businessman. South of the new Collier County was then Monroe County for President James Monroe. In the mid-1910s, even though he was in his 50s, Billy was just as good a hunter as he'd been in his youth, with plenty of energy to be out in the woods all day. James Wilson even tried to keep up with Billy. Billy was hired to help in building stores in Fort Pierce in 1916. He did love to be back, though, at Indian Prairie. That's a region west of Lake Okeechobee, where he could farm. In the 1920s, he was farming and hunting. But Billy was also working with state officials to have as much land as possible set aside solely for the Seminole tribes. Brighton Reservation was created, consisting of 36,000 acres west of Lake Okeechobee. Come March 1927, Billy had the opportunity to meet the governor of Florida, John Martin, and it was at the Florida State Sheriff's Association near Lake Okeechobee. The governor first approached and said, "Howdy," and Billy and the other Seminoles there just said nothing. Sheriff Bob Baker came over, introduced the governor to Billy as the big white man chief. Billy then offered his hand to shake, and the governor said, "Howdy," and Billy answered, "Ugh." There are some different writings that Billy's wife may have died in the late 1890s, and others have that she died in 1928. No records to confirm either way. In February 1929, U.S. President Herbert Hoover came to see the damage around Lake Okeechobee due to the 1928 devastating hurricane. Hoover came to Brighton Reservation, where Billy and other Seminoles greeted the president. Billy then took Hoover hunting, fishing, and even shot a turkey for Hoover, which was then prepared and served to the president later that night for dinner. Billy's father, Billy Farwell, died at the age of 92 on July 17, 1932. Another person who wanted to help the Florida Seminoles was Albert Devane. Billy worked with him and shared his knowledge about the Seminoles. On January 6, 1937, in Tallahassee, there was the inaugural parade for the newly elected Florida governor, Fred P. Cone. The parade had many marching groups from across the state, including the Indian delegation led by Billy Bowlegs. All the Seminoles were dressed in brightly colored native attire. In the photo of the Seminole delegation, Billy is the second from the left, a very proud moment for the Seminoles. Into the 1940s, Billy remains active at Brighton Reservation, always appears in his best Seminole clothing. Village life remains the same as it has for years, only now with their own property. Two of his close friends, who had helped secure Indian land, passed away in the mid-1940s. James in 1943, Minnie in 1947, both in Kissimmee. The photos continued over the years and people to visit him. Those who observed Billy Bowlegs stated he was a grand old man, a stunning man, just a marvelous man in every way. Even with mixed heritage, Billy always thought of himself as a full Seminole. Billy and a fellow Seminole, Sam Huff, wore the brightly colored gala outfits for the annual Green Corn Dance. Over the years, the Seminole clothing styles changed some. Billy's son, Eli Morgan, was also at Brighton Reservation. Albert Devane interviewed Morgan to get a younger generation's thoughts on Indian life. Billy was always called on to greet visitors to the reservation. The Florida Folk Art Festival was a large event with many official visitors coming from across the state. Major Edward T. Eden, in 1954, an expert on the Seminole Wars, gathered information from Billy Bowlegs III. They used the very traditional greeting of grasping elbows instead of shaking hands. Billy was most at home at his camp at Brighton Reservation, where he could live and cook for himself, fished, and farm. He was always noted for his fine traditional Seminole clothing styles that he wore very proudly. He truly represented the Seminole tribes. His cook camp used the tradition of the circle of logs for a campfire. During 1958 and 59, he did not slow down, but continued as a greeter, a go-between representative of the Seminoles. Any special ceremonies or events, he was there to share the Seminole history. A new decade of the 1960s started, and Billy, at age 98, was always present and ready. Seminole historian Albert Devane loved to spend hours with Billy Bowlegs, asking questions of the Indian traditions, their skills, their attitudes, their beliefs. So many photographs taken of Billy Bowlegs III, maybe more than any one Seminole or any other Native American Indian. A very special visitor in early 1961 was former U.S. President Herbert Hoover, who came to the Lake Okeechobee area. They had last met in 1929 when Billy took Hoover hunting. After Billy speaking about the president's visit, Hubert was very touched by Billy's comments. It was a great reconnecting of two friends some 32 years later. Billy next developed a great bond with Stewart's own James Hutchinson, a Martin County High School class of 1950 and a very well-known artist. James and his wife Joan came to the Brighton Reservation. They came to learn and live among the Seminoles, to study them for future artwork that James would create. A Fort Pierce artist, Eugene B. Williams, did an artistic depiction of the signing of the treaty that wound up the 1830 Seminole War, which was then canceled, the treaty, by Chief Osceola by putting a knife right through the document. Billy Bowlegs III was present at the painting's unveiling. Billy, serving as a ceremonial diplomat, continued well into the 1961 time period with various visitors. Billy and James and Joan Hutchinson became very good friends while camping so close to each other at the reservation. James stated Billy made a point to head first thing in the morning to the Hutchinson camp for coffee that was made by Joan, and relaying to both of them some marvelous Seminole tales. Hutchinson was able to create a wonderful portrait of Billy, used then as the cover for the Florida Living magazine in July 1961. On page 2 of the magazine was an interview with Jim and Joan about their living in the Indian camps for months. Hutchinson later executed a series of paintings covering various Seminole individuals and traditional native practices. The Jonathan Dickinson Shipwreck Marker was dedicated at Jonathan Dickinson State Park on Sunday, October 22, 1961. Two honored guests included Billy Bowlegs III and the Seminole historian Albert Devane. The plaque was sponsored by the DAR Jonathan Dickinson chapter. With the dedication of the new Elliott Museum, a special guest was Billy Bowlegs. He was in the 2.5-mile parade that went from downtown Stuart to the Elliott on Saturday, November 18, 1961. He was driven in a 1910 Stanley steamer vehicle by Morris Farce. It was estimated that about 10,000 spectators were along the City Hall to the beaches route. Then Billy was the guest at the dedication ceremony held at the Elliott after the parade at 1 p.m. He was introduced by Albert Devane, his longtime friend of nearly 45 years and authority on Seminole Indians. A big 100th birthday celebration was held for Billy at the Dania Indian Reservation in Broward County. He had a cake all with candles covered over it. Many friends came to help him celebrate. He always loved being at his camp in Brighton Reservation. Billy continued to meet and provide stories for the historian Albert Devane. As always, still skilled with a rifle. Also interviewed was Eli Morgan and his wife, Leland Bowers, at the Brighton Reservation. Still some great photos of Billy, 1963 and into early 1964. His niece, Ada Pierce, looked after him. He grew older in years, but was never senile. He died peacefully at his home on February 13th, 1965, just 4 days before his 103rd birthday. His home, the Brighton Reservation, west of Lake Okeechobee, which he helped get established. Buried at the Orgeton Cemetery, 9 miles west of Moorhaven on State Road 78 in the Seminole burial section. Buried with him was his walking stick, a few prize letters, some clothes, plus a photo of Billy himself in 1890 while he was hunting. A road sign honoring Billy in late 1965 was placed on West State Road 78 and US 27 in Glades County. It had to be replaced years later, 2008, just from where. A tribute was read of his accomplishments for the U.S. Senate Congressional Record, held on February 16, 1966, and done by the Senator Holland of Florida. A bridge over the Kissimmee River in Okeechobee County on State Road 70, north of the city, was named for Billy Bowlegs III as a bridge in 1969. Eli Morgan, his son, carried on, but could never be the true diplomat his father was. James Hutchinson, the artist, did a portrait of Eli also. Eli did pass away February 1975 in Glades County. A large mural was done in 2016 by Keith Goodson in Lake Placid, depicting a scene of Billy telling Indian stories to the historian Albert Devane. Devane had died already in 1969. Museums recognize the Seminoles and Billy Bowlegs III. The Elliott Museum has exhibits, a likeness of Billy wearing his famed turban. At the History Miami Archives, his outfit, a shirt and skirt, were once at the Belle Glade Museum, but now down in Miami. The Stuart Heritage Museum in downtown Stuart has a very large display of true artifacts of the Seminoles, all donated to the museum, even their hand-cranked sewing machines to make their clothes. Billy was truly an extraordinary Floridian and Seminole. He was a witness to many life changes and people over his years, and helped to make history with his achievements.